Hi, guys. Every year, I try my absolute best to tackle at least a few books that are in some way intimidating. Even to me, who reads maybe some books that a lot of people, perhaps most people, aren't interested in because they're, literary or sort of more serious history or something. These are the books that I pass on my bookshelf when I think, I don't know if I'm up for that. But sometimes, once in a blue moon, I walk by one and I think, I'm going to start that one tonight. And I did that a few weeks ago, and I was just passing by the M's on my fiction shelf, and here's what I picked up. Thomas Mann's Dr. Faustus. And let me get the subtitle in there for you. It says, The Life of the German Composer Adrian Leverkühn. I think it goes on to say, oh yes, on the side there, as told by a friend, right there. If you're not familiar with Thomas Mann, he wrote probably his best known piece of fiction is the novel/novella Death in Venice, which he wrote as a pretty young man. He also wrote Buddenbrooks. He also wrote The Magic Mountain later on in life. This was actually his last major finished work. He wrote this about 8 years before he died. He also wrote Joseph and His Brothers, which is a tetralogy of 4 novels, of course, based on ancient pharaohic Egypt. So just this really massive titan of German literature in the first half of the 20th century, won a Nobel Prize. Just really, really important. And I'll tell you a little bit about this book. So there are classics, and then there are classics with a capital C. In the latter, these classics with a capital C, these are the books that you can really pat yourself on the back for finally putting behind you, or I guess I should say completing, since these kinds of books never really leave you behind. And this is definitely one of those classics with a capital C. It's full of everything we associate, good or bad, with the word classic. It has meditations on philosophy, on art, on mortality, on music, on music, on music, on music. It is about a composer, as I said, and there is a lot about music and everything else under the sun. Needless to say, this isn't the type of book that everyone is going to enjoy. It's not even the type of book that most people are going to enjoy. In fact, if you even have the slightest hesitation about reading something like this, you probably won't. If you think you might like it, I would say read the first 50 pages, and if you love them, you'll love the rest of the book, because in the last 500 pages, nothing really stylistically changes. It sort of moves at that same slow pace. I happen to be personally one of those readers who doesn't mind traveling glacially if I happen to be given a lot of things to think about. And in that respect, Thomas Mann never fails to deliver, that's for sure. Dr. Faustus takes the form of a biography of Adrian Leverkühn, who is the most illustrious German composer of his day. And this biography is written by, again, this is not a real biography, it's a fictional biography of a fictional German composer. But the fictional person who's writing it is his lifelong friend, whose name is Serenus Zeitblom, which, if you translate that into English, you get something like Serene Bloom of Time, which sounds super cheesy. And I know, actually it turns out that all of the major and really almost all of the minor characters have have names that mean something, sort of like a Toni Morrison novel, Megan Dead and, all of those in Song of Solomon. But my knowledge of German is very, very slight, so I could pick out a few, like Serenes Zeitblume. I mean, that pretty much pops out at you as Serene Bloom of Time. But there are some other ones that weren't as obvious, but if you look them up online, pretty much every single character has a name that actually has a meaning. So it's told by his friend Serenes Zeitblume. Adrian's intellect and capacity for ideas are really, truly astounding. He actually goes to university to study religion and theology, but ends up going into composition. So at a very young age, in his, say, early to mid-20s, I would say, Adrian makes a pact with the devil. This occurs about halfway through the novel, hence the name Dr. Faustus. Makes a pact with the devil in return for a promise of many years of heightened creativity and inspiration. And after purposefully contracting syphilis to sort of add to the allure of his romantic genius associated with his insanity, he becomes obsessed with the themes of apocalypse, damnation, and Schoenberg's achromaticism in his own music. In the final scene of the book, Adrian summons all of his friends and acquaintances he's made throughout the book and shares his lifelong secret about this satanic pact, and that this satanic pact has really been the entire source of his success, his fame, his creativity, his ability, perhaps his own superior intelligence, everything he owed to this pact that said, I'll give up my soul and you give me, I think the agreement was 22 years or something of life and the ability to write amazing music. So he summons all of his friends and he tells them, and the reactions of his friends range from revulsion to denial to undying love and support. Adrian lingers on in a sort of syphilitic paralysis for several years until the onset of World War II, at which point Serenos visits him one last time, and Adrian dies on the last couple of pages of the novel. Thomas Mann really is doing more than just telling the life of an artist and an intellectual in this book, because he interlards in his narrative a lot of German political history, especially World War I to World War II, which is again when Adrian dies. Mann himself began his life as an ardent conservative around the time of World War I, when he was, say, in his 30s, late 30s, 40. But by the time he wrote this novel in the mid to late 1940s, he was in his 70s. And his faith in the goodness and purity of the German spirit, qua German spirit, that the Germans were good simply because they were Germans, had severely diminished. And he let this show through the voice of Serenos. He has, as he should, I think, searing words for Hitler in this book. Very, very searing words. He doesn't try to hide the fact that he's talking about Hitler. He openly uses the word Führer. So we know who he's talking about. And he did not have to worry about writing this book in Germany. I think a year or two before he started writing this, he actually moved to California because he was just so frustrated with the situation that was going on in Germany, and also writing a book like this in Germany could possibly get him, put in prison or worse. like I said, he has really harsh words for the Fuhrer, for the Third Reich, and what they were doing to this country that he really and truly loved and thought was great. One of Mann's main points, however, is that this political decadence doesn't remain wholly within the political sphere. It seeps into cultural and philosophical and aesthetic life. Mann was horrified by the direction that Germany was taking in the 1930s, but he very well might have been more horrified by the ramifications that this had for the possibilities of German art and German thought. Georgi Lukács, the Hungarian literary critic and Marxist, mentioned in his book of essays on Mann's novels the historical standpoint from which the novel is written. Cyrannus is writing right after World War II, shortly after Adrian passes away. And this sort of gives the novel a particularly striking sense that German history, and maybe even history itself with a capital H, is running headlong into this catastrophe from which not even it can save itself. That sort of Adrian's life and German history are coterminous, and that when he's gone, the history is gone, and that what Adrian himself did, sell his soul to the devil, is the same thing that Germany is doing under the Third Reich. It can't be stressed enough, as you might be able to tell from my short discussion, or 11 minutes and 30 seconds longer discussion of this novel, the degree to which this is truly a novel of ideas. It is an intellectual novel. It is heavy. It is hard-hitting. It is super serious. Mann's knowledge of philosophy and theology, and especially music, like I said earlier, are on full display. At one point earlier in the novel, he goes on for several pages about why Beethoven's last piano sonata, number 32, opus 111, has only 2 movements, and the profound philosophical implications that this has for the history and direction of music. I mean, for like 10 or 15 or 20 pages, he talks about why the opus 111 has only 2 movements. So it's that kind of novel. But this is really my manna from heaven. I mean, this is the kind of book that I live for. But I realize it's an acquired taste, and most people aren't going to like it. But for those who love humoring a playful intellect, like that of Thomas Mann's for over 500 pages, this is just pure mind candy. And I loved it. Thomas Mann's Dr. Faustus, The Life, you can get the subtitle in there, The Life of German Composer Adrian Leverkühn, as told by a friend.